In this next episode, Dato Henry recounts meeting Jeremy Holloway, the researcher and writer of the book on the moths of Borneo.
Coming back to Cambridge, within the first 2 weeks of my arriving at Cambridge, I attended my one and only meeting of the Cambridge Natural History Society, where I met Jeremy Holloway, who was a student in the same year as me, but at a different college. He came back to my room for a cup of coffee, and within half an hour we had agreed that in 1965 long vacation we would mount an expedition. Initially we thought to Nepal, but that proved to be too difficult, and we ended up agreeing on Mount Kinabalu. There were 3 members of the expedition, all undergraduates: Holloway, myself, and a man called Jonathan Banks, who later went on to become the leading expert on the pests of stored grain products with the CSIRO in Canberra. We got back to Mount Kinabalu and we were able, through the offices of Ian Valentine, to borrow a hospital army tent from the forces in Labuan, and we managed to erect that on what is now the site of the park headquarters at Kinabalu National Park. And we spent the next 8 weeks going up and down the mountain, collecting moths at different altitudes. We ended up with about 20,000 specimens of moths and butterflies, all of which are now in the Natural History Museum in London. And they formed the basis of Holloway's PhD thesis. I came back to Malaysia, having done a chartered accountancy course after I'd finished at Cambridge. And incidentally, in the other 2 long vacations from Cambridge, the first one I worked on a ranch in Montana, at the end of which I purchased a 150cc motorcycle and drove down through the Rockies and sold it in Los Angeles, and then went back to the West Coast. And there was an interesting episode there because my father had made me a member of Brooks's Club, St. James's Street, which had reciprocal relations with the Knickerbocker Club, which is a very smart club in New York. And I went to the Knickerbocker Club one day for breakfast and horrified the waitress, because I was very fit at the time, by eating a simply enormous breakfast. And then I wanted to go to the loo. And it turned out that the loo was down a long, long corridor, which I went down. And afterwards, I discovered that the door was jammed and I couldn't get out. For reasons which I no longer remember, I had with me an umbrella, and there was a skylight up at the top there. So I poked the umbrella through the skylight and eventually managed to trip up somebody on the street outside and explained to them that I was locked in the loo of the Knickerbocker Club. It was far too far away for me to shout for assistance to the hall porter. Would they kindly go round and persuade the hall porter to come and liberate me from the loo, which indeed they did, and to my enormous embarrassment, as often happens on these occasions, as soon as the chap tried the door, it opened immediately. During my 3rd and final long vacation, I went on a United Nations work camp to Benin City in Nigeria, which was run by Quakers. And after the work camp, which lasted for about 6 weeks, very international, I took a series of mammy wagons through what was then Dahomey to Nigeria, and then up into Ghana, Upper Volta, Mali Republic, and back via Dakar in Senegal. So coming back to Cambridge, and after Cambridge, qualified as an accountant in London. It was an extremely uncomfortable experience. I loathed accountancy, but I was very glad that my father had insisted that I take it up, because I would never, without it, have been able to lead the career which I have been able to lead here in Malaysia. And at the end of the accountancy course, I spent a short period in the firm of Thomas Barlow and Brother in London, which was administering what were then a series of quoted companies owning almost exclusively at that stage rubber estates. It was a very claustrophobic atmosphere in the office, with my father and my uncle, the age of the century, this was 1969, and 4 years older respectively, and a series of elder cousins there. And it was agreed that I should come out to Malaysia, and the plan was that I would spend 12 to 18 months in Malaysia and then go back to the family hierarchy and the family business, which was a prospect which frankly filled me with horror. My experience in Labuan and then on Mount Kinabalu had indicated to me that Southeast Asia was a far more congenial place. So I was sent out to Malaysia immediately after the May riots, and my father very sensibly suggested that I go to Tea Estate, which still exists near Taiping on the coast, on the basis that on that estate there grew coconuts, cocoa, rubber and oil palms. So I had some modest exposure over the course of the next 4 months to all of those crops, which was of course extremely valuable to me. At the end of that period, I was summoned back to the Barlow Boustead office in Jalan Ampang, where I became finance director. And Barlow Boustead at that stage was controlled by members of the Barlow family. There was a very senior expat who was the chairman of Barlow Boustead and CEO, a man called Gordon Lang. And after about 2 or 3 months working in Barlow Boustead, I thought that it would be nice to give a small drinks party. At that stage, I was living in a flat in Kong Lam Road, which is just around the corner from here. And I didn't know many people, so I invited all the executives in Barlow Boustead, of which there were 7 or 8 expats and a similar number of Malaysians, including, of course, Gordon Lang and his wife. And that evening of the party, which was held on the ground floor of the flat, Gordon Lang appeared significantly later than everybody else, and evidently having had several drinks. He was a very tall man. He propped himself up on the doorpost and peered over the heads of the people milling around having their drinks, and turned to me and said in a very loud voice, "Oh, Henry, I see that you've invited the local staff." And it turned out that that was the first time in the history of Barlow Boustead, this was 1970, that the local staff had ever been invited to any of the expatriate social dues, straight out of E.M. Forster's Passage to India. It all changed over the next 18 months, but it was a very revealing moment indeed. In the meantime, the work in Barlow Boustead involved keeping a fairly close eye on what was happening, and it became apparent that the CEO was in cahoots with one of our clients, and it was a fairly unsatisfactory situation. My father was extremely close with the CEO and couldn't face the prospect of breaking with him, so I got absolutely no support at all from my father. So I had nothing very much in common with the other expats who were working in Barlow Boustead at the time.
I hope you have found this episode engaging, and see you at the next one.